become calm and rational. Inner steel, full script. Cold open. You're in the middle of an argument. Your chest is tight. Your thoughts are moving faster than your mouth can keep up. Someone says something that cuts you, and before your brain even catches up, your hands are shaking, your voice cracks, and you've already said something you're going to regret for the next 3 days. That moment right there, that half second between the trigger and the reaction, that is where your entire life is decided. Not in the gym. Not in the boardroom. Not in the quiet moments when everything is going well and life feels manageable, and you have time to think. But in that exact instant when everything inside you wants to explode, that is where your character is built or broken. That is where you find out who you really are. And here is what no one tells you: calm is not weakness. Calm is not indifference. Calm is not the absence of feeling. Calm is the sharpest, most powerful weapon a man can carry into any situation he will ever face. It is the tool that makes everything else, your intelligence, your strength, your skill, your vision, actually work the way it is supposed to. The Stoics knew this. Marcus Aurelius, a man who ruled the most powerful empire in the world, who dealt daily with war, plague, betrayal, corruption, and personal tragedy of the deepest kind, wrote in his private journal, not for public display but for himself alone, that his greatest daily battle was never with his enemies. It was with his own mind. Every morning he had to remind himself to stay steady, to think before acting, to choose reason over impulse, to hold the line inside himself before he could hold it anywhere else. If the Emperor of Rome, a man with every resource, every advisor, every luxury imaginable, had to train himself every single day to be calm and rational, what makes any of us think it is going to come naturally? That somehow we will just wake up one day and be composed, clear-headed, and in control of ourselves without doing the work? It will not happen that way. It never does. But it can be built. It has always been built, one practice at a time, by ordinary men and women who decided they were done being controlled by their own reactions. This is inner steel. And today, we are going to walk through exactly how to become calm and rational, not as a theory, but as a lived daily reality. Every point in this video comes with a story, because that is how truth actually lands. Not as an abstract idea, but as a moment in someone's real life that you can recognize in your own. Stay with us until the end. The final point is the one most people never hear. It is the one that makes all the others click into place. And if you are someone who is serious about building a mind and a life that cannot be easily shaken, hit subscribe to Inner Steel right now. We put everything we have into these videos, and they are made for people like you. Let us begin. Point 1. The man who controlled the room by saying nothing. There is a story about Abraham Lincoln that most history books skip over, because it is not dramatic in the way people expect from the 16th President of the United States. During one of the tensest periods of the Civil War, a group of Union generals burst into Lincoln's office. They were furious, panicked, and contradicting each other at full volume. One general was slamming his fist on the desk. Another was pacing the room in circles. A third was demanding Lincoln sign an emergency order immediately before catastrophe descended on the entire Union Army. The room was chaos, uniformed, decorated, high-ranking chaos. Lincoln sat back in his chair. He said nothing. He just let them talk. Let them argue. Let them burn through the energy of their own panic. Minutes passed. The generals began to run out of steam. Their urgency, with no fuel coming from Lincoln, started to deflate. And then, when the room had quieted just enough, Lincoln leaned forward slightly and asked one question in an even, unhurried voice. "What do we know for certain right now?" The room went completely still. That question, that one calm, clear, rational question, recentered everything. It cut through all the noise. It pulled everyone out of their emotional spiral and pointed their attention at what actually mattered, facts, not feelings. What was real, not what was feared. Within the hour, a clear, actionable plan had emerged from what had been total chaos moments before. Lincoln did not panic. He did not raise his voice. He did not match the general's emotional energy. He understood something that most people spend their entire lives never figuring out: whoever is calmest in the room has the most power. Not because calm is a show of dominance, but because calm is a show of function, of a mind that is still operational, still processing, still capable of leading, when everyone else has let their brain go offline. And this is not just a metaphor. This is neuroscience. When you get emotionally reactive, when a situation triggers your amygdala and floods your brain with cortisol and adrenaline, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thinking, weighing consequences, long-term planning, and clear judgment, literally goes offline. Not metaphorically. Literally. The blood flow shifts. The neural activity changes. You stop thinking and start reacting. You become simultaneously less accurate, less effective, less persuasive, less trustworthy, and less capable, all at the same time, in the exact moment when you need those qualities most. Calm, on the other hand, keeps that prefrontal cortex online. It keeps the part of you that can actually think clearly, fully engaged. You see more of what is actually happening. You think faster and more accurately. You speak with more precision and more authority. And the people around you feel it, even if they cannot name what they are feeling. They feel that you are someone who can be trusted when things go wrong. The first truth of becoming calm and rational is this: calm is not passive. Calm is not the absence of reaction. Calm is an active discipline, a choice made in real time, in the moment of pressure, when every instinct in your body is screaming at you to do something, say something, react to something. The practice starts small, because that is how all real change starts. When someone cuts you off in traffic, pause before you honk. Take one breath and ask yourself if this moment is worth your nervous system. When your phone buzzes with something irritating, wait 10 seconds before you respond. When someone says something that spikes your blood pressure, breathe once, slowly, before you open your mouth. Notice how different the response is when you do this. Notice how the quality of what comes out of you changes. These micro pauses seem insignificant. They are not. Each one is a repetition. A small training session. A moment where you put yourself between the trigger and the reaction, and chose differently. Over time, those repetitions accumulate. They build a habit. The habit builds a disposition. The disposition builds a character. Lincoln did not walk into that room and summon calm from nowhere. He had been practicing it his entire life, through poverty, through failure, through the loss of his son, through years of political defeat and public humiliation. By the time the panicking generals arrived, calm was not something he had to find. It was something he had become. That is where you are heading. That is what this work builds toward. Point 2. The monk who walked through a war. In the spring of 1966, Thich Nhat Hanh was living in Vietnam. He was a Buddhist monk who had dedicated his life to peace, to stillness, to the kind of inner calm that most people consider idealistic. The country around him was not calm. It was burning. Villages were being razed. Families were being torn apart. People he had known his entire life were dying in ways that made no sense and served no purpose. The war had no mercy and no pause and no consideration for anyone's humanity. One morning, he received word that a village he had personally helped rebuild, a place where he had worked with children and families, where he had invested real hope, had been bombed again. Everything gone. All of it. Again. His students watched him. They were waiting for what seemed inevitable, for him to break, to cry out, to curse the sky, to collapse under the weight of what this was. He did none of those things. He sat quietly. He breathed deliberately and slowly. He allowed himself to feel what he felt, the grief, the devastation, the weight of it all, without becoming it. And then he said, quietly and without drama, "We will rebuild again." Not because he did not feel the pain. He felt it more deeply than most people ever feel anything. But he had spent years learning, truly learning, not just intellectually understanding, the difference between emotion and reaction. Between feeling something and being governed by it. He could be moved without being swept away. He could carry the weight without being crushed by it. This is the second truth. Becoming calm and rational does not mean becoming emotionally dead. It does not mean you stop feeling things or care less or become numb to the world. That is not calm. That is dissociation. That is a different kind of brokenness. What it actually means is that you feel everything, and you choose what you do with what you feel. Emotions are information. This is something most people never truly understand. Anger is not an enemy. It is a signal. It tells you that something has violated a value you hold, that a boundary has been crossed, that something is wrong and deserves attention. Sadness tells you that something mattered. Fear tells you that something is at stake. Frustration tells you that there is a gap between where you are and where you want to be. These are messages from your inner life about your outer reality. Signals are useful. Signals, when interpreted correctly, guide you toward better decisions and better action. But when you let the signal become the response, when you let anger drive the action before you have understood what the anger is actually about, when you let fear make the decision before you have assessed whether the fear is accurate, when you let grief determine the strategy before you have processed what the grief is trying to tell you, you stop using the information. You become the information. And you lose your ability to think, to lead, to choose, to build. The Stoic philosophers called the practice of maintaining this separation the cultivation of the inner citadel. The idea was this: no matter what happens outside you, no matter how violent or unjust or painful the external world becomes, there is a place inside you that nothing external can touch without your permission. A core that stays steady. A center that holds. Not because you have suppressed everything, but because you have learned to be with everything without being controlled by it. That citadel is not built by avoiding hard things. It is not built in comfort and safety and stability. It is built by going through hard things, real, difficult, painful, unfair things, without losing yourself in the process. Every time you stay composed when everything inside you wanted to break down, you add one more stone to that citadel. Every time you breathe instead of lashing out, you add one more stone. Every time you choose to respond rather than react, you strengthen the walls of that inner place that nothing can reach. Build it slowly. Build it on purpose. And one day, you will walk through a storm that would have completely destroyed the person you used to be, and you will still be standing, still thinking clearly, still capable of moving forward. Point 3. The Roman general who chose to listen first. In 168 BC, the Roman Senate was in a state of near desperation. They needed a general to handle a war that had already broken two of their best commanders. The Macedonian king Persis was widely considered unbeatable. He had tactical genius, mountainous terrain, and an army that had humiliated Rome twice in succession. The pressure on whoever took this command was immense. The expectation, the cultural demand, was for aggression, for boldness, for decisive, overwhelming force that would reassert Roman dominance and silence the critics. The man they chose was Lucius Aemilius Paulus. He was not a young hothead looking to make his name. He was 60 years old, experienced, and known for something unusual in Roman military culture. He was known for being extraordinarily patient. He arrived at the front, assessed the situation, and then did the one thing that no one expected from a Roman general under this kind of pressure. He stopped. For weeks, Paulus refused to attack. He refused to be drawn into a battle on terrain that favored Persis. He spent his time observing, watching the movements of the Macedonian army, studying the geography, talking with soldiers, gathering intelligence from locals, understanding the patterns and habits of the enemy. His officers were growing restless. His men were confused. Some interpreted the patience as cowardice. In failed relationships where a conversation that could have been resolved with one honest question instead became an argument that left damage that took months to repair. In business decisions that looked obvious in the moment and catastrophic in hindsight. In words said in anger that changed how someone saw them permanently. Here is the practice. Before you respond to anything that matters, anything that has real stakes, real consequences, real emotional weight, give yourself time to gather information. Ask yourself these 3 questions. What do I actually know for certain right now? What am I assuming, and is that assumption verified? What haven't I considered yet? These are not the questions of a slow or weak man. These are the questions of a powerful one. These are the questions Lucius Aemilius Paulus was asking for weeks while his officers thought he was stalling. When you train yourself to ask these questions reflexively, when slowing down becomes as instinctive as breathing, your decisions will get sharper, faster, and more reliable. Because you will have stopped wasting time cleaning up the wreckage of reactive choices. Pause. Observe. Think fully. Then move. Point 4. The prisoner who built a mind. Robert Stroud arrived in solitary confinement with almost nothing. No contact with other prisoners. No stimulation. No windows worth speaking of. Walls, silence, and time that had no end he could see. By any measure of the environment, the conditions were designed to break a man. And most men in his position were broken, not dramatically, but slowly, quietly, the way a mind dissolves when there is nothing to hold on to. Stroud chose something different. Not because he was naturally serene. Not because prison was easy for him. But because something in him refused the dissolution. One day, a small bird landed on the narrow sill of his cell. Stroud watched it. Watched it the way a man watches something when he has nothing else to watch and everything to lose. And then something shifted. He became curious. Not about the bird specifically, but about the fact of his own curiosity. About the fact that even here, in the worst conditions imaginable, his mind could reach towards something and find interest in it. He got books. He started taking notes. He started asking questions. He became fascinated by ornithology, the study of birds, and he studied it the way a desperate man studies the one thing keeping him alive. Because in a very real sense, it was. Years passed. Stroud accumulated knowledge that very few people outside of academic institutions possessed. He eventually wrote books on the subject that became standard references in the field. From a solitary confinement cell. With nothing. He had done something that most people in abundant, comfortable, stimulation-rich lives never manage. He had turned stillness into focus, and focus into mastery. The fourth truth, calm is a resource. And like any resource, you can cultivate it deliberately or deplete it carelessly. Most people deplete it carelessly, every day, without realizing what they are doing. They fill every silence with noise, every commute with media, every quiet moment with their phone, every pause in conversation with anxious filling. They are chronically, relentlessly overstimulated, and then they wonder why they cannot think clearly, why they make decisions they regret, why their relationships are exhausting, why they feel perpetually behind and anxious. You cannot think well if you never create space to think. This is not a metaphor. Cognitive science confirms it. Your brain needs periods of low stimulation to consolidate information, to make connections, to process experience, to develop insight. When you deny it that space, it cannot do its most important work. The Stoics practiced deliberately sitting in silence. Marcus Aurelius began every morning by reminding himself, calmly, methodically, that the day ahead would be difficult. People would frustrate him. Plans would not go as expected. Something would go wrong. He rehearsed the difficulty before it arrived, not to catastrophize, but to prepare. So that when the difficulty actually came, it did not find him off guard and reactive. He had already been there, already been calm, already decided how he would respond. This is a practice you can begin today. Not an hour of meditation. Not a retreat. Just 5 minutes of quiet in the morning before the noise starts. Sit. Breathe slowly. Let your thoughts move without chasing them. Set one intention for how you want to respond to difficulty today. That is it. Over days and weeks, this small practice begins to change the baseline state of your nervous system. It builds the capacity for calm the way consistent sleep builds physical recovery, not dramatically, but reliably, cumulatively, in a way that compounds over time. Create silence. Protect your mental environment. What you allow into your mind, the outrage, the drama, the noise, the constant stream of stimulation, shapes your nervous system, your default emotional state, and your ability to think clearly under pressure. Choose what you let in. And give your mind the space it needs to function the way it was built to. Point 5. The mind that separated feeling from fact. Before Napoleon Bonaparte became one of the greatest strategic minds in military history, he worked with people who observed him closely and left accounts of how his thinking actually operated. Madame de Remusat, a court lady who had extraordinary access to Napoleon during his rise, wrote in her memoirs about something Napoleon did before any major decision or campaign that almost no one else knew about. He went completely still and quiet. For hours. Sometimes for days. He refused meetings. He walked alone. He sat without speaking. And this was not depression or indecision. Those who knew him understood it as something deliberate and disciplined. Napoleon was doing the internal work of separating his emotional response to a situation from his rational analysis of it. He called it, in her account, detaching from the emotion of the moment. He had learned, through years of conscious practice, to feel the pressure, the stakes, the fear, the excitement, the weight of what was at hand, and then to set that feeling aside long enough to look at the situation as a system. As a problem with components. As something that could be understood, planned around, and solved, if you could get your emotions out of the driver's seat long enough to actually see it clearly. This process is what allowed him to see battlefields as equations rather than chaos. To see political situations as structures rather than conflicts. To stay composed and analytical when everyone around him was either terrified or reckless. He was not cold. He was disciplined. There is a profound difference. The fifth truth: rational thinking is an active process. It is not something that happens automatically when you calm down. It is something you have to deliberately choose and deliberately practice, every time the stakes are high enough to matter. Here is what that choice looks like in practice, in the moments when it counts most. Something goes wrong. Something always goes wrong, in some form, every single day. Your first instinct, the one that arrives before conscious thought, is to blame, to panic, to catastrophize, to tell yourself a story about what this means and how bad it is going to get. That instinct is human. It is also, almost always, inaccurate. Not because things are never actually bad, but because the story your reactive mind tells you in the first moment of difficulty is almost never the complete, accurate picture of what is actually happening. Instead, before you respond, run through this sequence. Ask yourself, what literally happened? Not what it means. Not how it makes you feel. Not what it might lead to. What literally, factually happened in the world right now. Get that part clear first. Then ask, what are my actual options from this position? Not the options your fear is showing you, the catastrophic ones, the ones that confirm your worst assumptions. The actual, practical, real-world options that exist. There are almost always more than your emotional brain is willing to show you. Then ask, what would the calmest, most effective version of me do next? This three-step sequence is not therapy. It is not philosophy. It is a practical decision-making framework that works in business, in relationships, in health, in finance, in leadership, in every domain where clear thinking produces better outcomes than reactive emotion. The emotion does not disappear when you do this. You are not suppressing it. You are redirecting it. You are saying, I feel this fully, and I am not going to let it drive. Get back in the seat. Take the wheel. And steer. Point 6. The king who lost everything and became wise. In the 6th century BC, there was a king named Croesus who ruled Lydia, in what is now western Turkey. At the height of his power, Croesus was the wealthiest man in the known world. Gold armies, trade routes, the admiration of every surrounding nation. He was, by every external measure, a man at the absolute apex of human achievement. The Athenian philosopher Solon visited his court. Croesus, in the way of men who are used to being told they are the greatest, asked Solon who he considered to be the happiest man in the world, fully expecting to hear his own name. Solon said it was a simple Athenian man named Tellus. A man who had lived a quiet, decent life, raised good children, served his city faithfully, and died peacefully in battle defending his home. Not a king. Not a wealthy man. A regular man who had lived with integrity and died with purpose. Croesus was offended. He did not understand. He pushed Solon for a better answer, and Solon's response was essentially this: You cannot call any man happy until you see how his life ends. Wealth and power are not happiness. They are circumstances. Circumstances change. Croesus dismissed the philosophy and sent Solon away. Not long after, the Persian king Cyrus the Great conquered Lydia. Croesus lost everything. His kingdom, his treasury, his freedom, his power, his identity. He was condemned to be burned alive on a pyre before his people. As the fire was being lit, Croesus, broken and humbled and facing his death, suddenly saw it. He understood, finally, everything Solon had tried to tell him. And he called out Solon's name. Cyrus stopped the execution. He asked Croesus what he meant. Croesus explained the whole story, the visit, the conversation, the lesson he had been too proud to hear. Cyrus was moved. He spared Croesus's life. He freed him. He eventually made him an advisor. The greatest disaster of Croesus's life had become the moment his real wisdom finally woke up. The sixth truth, clear, rational thinking, requires humility. The two are inseparable. Arrogance is one of the most powerful and most underestimated blockers of accurate thinking that exists. When you are certain you already know, when you are sure you understand the situation, sure you have read it correctly, sure your interpretation is right and everyone who sees it differently is wrong, you stop processing information that contradicts your certainty. You start filtering out the data that does not confirm what you already believe. You stop updating your picture of reality. And you stop growing. This is not a moral failing. It is a cognitive one. The human brain is wired to do this. It is called confirmation bias, and it operates powerfully in smart, competent people. The solution is not to distrust your thinking entirely. The solution is to hold your conclusions with appropriate looseness. To stay genuinely open to the possibility that you are missing something. To ask, regularly and sincerely, what don't I know yet? What might I be wrong about? What would change my view, and am I open to seeing it? Humility in this sense is not self-deprecation. It is not presenting yourself as uncertain or unqualified. It is the intellectual discipline of keeping your thinking alive and connected to reality rather than to your ego's preferred version of it. The wisest, most effective people throughout history were not the ones who were always right. They were the ones who updated fastest when they were wrong. They were the ones who could hear contradictory information, process it honestly, and adjust, without drama, without defensiveness, without the need to protect a self-image that depended on never being wrong. Be that person. Stay genuinely open. Hold your certainty loosely. And let reality teach you what your assumptions cannot. Point 7. The boxer who turned loss into precision. In 1936, Joe Louis walked into Madison Square Garden under enormous pressure. His fight with Max Schmeling was not just a sporting event. The political weight of it, Nazi Germany's champion against America's hope, had turned a boxing match into something that felt, to millions of people, like much more. The expectation was overwhelming. Louis should be explosive, aggressive, dominant from the first bell. He should make a statement. He should destroy this man who represented something dark and make it look easy. Louis came out measured. Too measured by some accounts. In the 12th round, Schmeling landed a right hand with precise, devastating timing. Louis went down for the first time in his career. He lost the fight. Here is what happened next. And this is the part that matters. Louis did not rage. He did not give public statements driven by shame or bravado. He did not make excuses or look for blame. He went back to the gym, got footage of the fight, and watched it until he found the thing he needed to find, the exact pattern Schmeling had used to set up that punch. There was a specific sequence of movements. A specific angle Louis had been leaving open consistently. A specific habit that Schmeling had identified and exploited. Louis trained to eliminate that vulnerability. Not in anger. Not in revenge. In cold, clear, methodical focus. He treated the loss as a data set. He extracted the information it contained. He acted on it. In 1938, 2 years later, they fought again. The entire world was watching. Hitler had personally told Schmeling that German victory was a certainty. Lewis destroyed Schmeling in 2 minutes and 4 seconds. It is still considered one of the most significant sporting moments of the 20th century. He did not win the rematch with emotion. He won it with information that he had gathered by being calm enough to look honestly at his failure. The seventh truth: the rational mind treats failure as data, not as identity. This distinction, between experiencing a failure and becoming it, is one of the most practically important things you can internalize. Most people, when they fail in any significant way, fold that failure into their self-concept. They do not just lose. They become a loser. They do not just make a mistake. They are a mistake. The loss becomes evidence for a verdict they then carry everywhere they go, reading every subsequent difficulty through the lens of that verdict. This is catastrophic thinking, and it destroys more human potential than almost any external force. Not because the failure was too painful, but because the person made the failure mean too much. Turned it into a conclusion rather than a lesson. The rational mind, the trained mind, the calm mind, does something entirely different. It sees the failure as information. Specific, useful, actionable information about what happened, where the gap was, what needs to change. It does not treat the gap as evidence of permanent inadequacy. It treats it as a location, a specific, findable, fixable location where effort and attention can make a real difference. The Stoic tradition teaches this directly. The obstacle, properly understood, is the way. Every setback contains within it the precise information you need to move forward more effectively. But you can only access that information if you are calm enough to look at what happened clearly, without the distortion of shame, or despair, or the defensive need to blame something external so you do not have to look at what you could do differently. When you fail, and you will, because every person building something real encounters failure at every significant scale, come back to the question: what can I learn from exactly what happened? What information does this contain? And then get back to work with that information in hand. Point 8. The philosopher who faced the end with his mind intact. In 65 AD, the philosopher Seneca received a message that no one wants to receive. The Emperor Nero, his former student, his protégé, the man whose mind Seneca had shaped and guided for years, had decided that Seneca was a threat. In the paranoid, erratic logic of Nero's court, Seneca's very existence had become politically inconvenient. Seneca was given the option of suicide. In Roman culture, this was considered a mercy. He accepted it. Before he died, Seneca sat down and wrote. Not letters of rage. Not curses aimed at Nero. Not desperate pleading for reconsideration or bargaining with whatever gods might be listening. He wrote calmly, with full attention, about what it means to live well. About virtue. About what actually matters and what does not. About the freedom available to any man at all, regardless of his circumstances, who has trained his mind to be unafraid of what it cannot control. His last hours, by accounts from people who were present, were composed. Even peaceful, in the specific way that a man is peaceful when he has spent his life building the capacity to hold what he is now holding. Seneca had not stumbled into that composure. He had built it deliberately, over decades of daily practice. He had written about the importance of that practice for years, knowing that one day a test would come, knowing that everyone who lives long enough eventually faces a test, and wanting to be ready when it did. The eighth truth: true calm is not situational. You cannot turn it on when you need it if you have not been building it when you did not. It is not a setting you can switch to under pressure. It is a character that you have grown into over time. This means the practice starts now. Not when life gets harder. Not when the stakes get higher. Not when the crisis arrives and you suddenly realize you are not equipped for it. Now. Every morning, before the noise of the day begins, before the phone, before the news, before the demands of other people flood your attention, take 5 minutes and sit with your own mind. This does not have to be formal or elaborate. Sit. Breathe deliberately. Notice what you are thinking and feeling without chasing any of it. Set a simple intention. Today, when something makes me want to react, I am going to pause before I do. That is the practice. Simple, unglamorous, daily. Over weeks and months, this practice does something that cannot be faked and cannot be rushed. It rewires the default response of your nervous system. It builds new neural pathways that activate under stress. It literally changes the brain at a structural level. Neuroscience has confirmed this repeatedly. The capacity for calm is not fixed. It is trainable. But only with consistent, patient, daily work. Seneca did not find composure in his last hours. He had been building it for 30 years. And when the ultimate test arrived, the one no person would choose and almost no one is ready for, he was ready. Not because he was superhuman. Because he had been doing the work that made him human in the fullest sense. Start today. One practice. 5 minutes. The storm is coming eventually for all of us. You want to already be steady when it does. Point 9. The scientist who stayed steady when everything failed. Marie Curie was living in Paris in the 1890s, surviving on almost nothing. She was one of the only women in her entire scientific program. In most rooms, the only one. The lab conditions were brutal, inadequate equipment, insufficient funding, cold that she described as numbing, and a persistent ambient dismissal from colleagues who did not believe she belonged there in the first place. Her experiments failed. Repeatedly. The results she needed did not come. The progress she was making was invisible to everyone except her. The resources she desperately needed arrived sporadically and insufficiently. There were dozens of rational reasons to conclude that this was not working, that the odds were too stacked, that the effort was not worth the cost. She came back to the lab every day with the same quiet, focused intensity. She treated every failed experiment exactly the way a calm, rational scientist should, not as evidence that she was wrong or that this could not work, but as a data point. As information about what was not the path forward, which by elimination revealed what might be. She remained emotionally steady enough, day after day, to extract the signal from the noise. To keep building the picture even when the picture refused to cooperate. To maintain the confidence not in any specific outcome, but in the process itself. That sustained, methodical, emotionally controlled focus led her to discover two previously unknown chemical elements, polonium and radium. It led her to become the first person in history to win 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different scientific fields. And it changed the course of medicine and physics in ways that are still unfolding more than a century later. She did not achieve this because she was immune to frustration or doubt. She achieved it because she had built the capacity to work through frustration and doubt without being stopped by them. The 9th truth: sustained calm and rational thinking are not just virtues. They are strategic advantages that compound over time. Here is what this means in practical terms. In any significant area of life, building a business, developing a skill, investing money, cultivating a relationship, working toward any meaningful long-term goal, the person who can maintain calm, clear thinking under sustained difficulty, over sustained time, will outperform almost everyone else. Not because they are more naturally talented. Not because they have access to more resources. But because they make better decisions consistently. And decision quality, accumulated over time, compounds. One better decision leads to a better position. A better position opens better possibilities. Better possibilities, navigated with more clear thinking, lead to better outcomes still. And the reverse is equally true. Each reactive, emotionally driven decision narrows the field. Each impulsive choice creates new problems that must be managed before progress can resume. Each failure to regulate emotion costs time, energy, and opportunity that cannot be recovered. Calm thinking is not passive. It is the most active thing a person can bring to the work. It is what separates people who build something lasting, brick by brick, decision by decision, over years, from people who spend their lives managing the consequences of their own reactivity. Invest in your calm deliberately. Treat it as a skill. Practice it the way a serious athlete practices technique, consistently, patiently, with the understanding that the return is real even when it is not immediately visible. Point 10. The slave whose freedom no one could take. Epictetus was born into slavery in the 1st century AD. He had no freedom, no rights, no property, and no meaningful control over almost any aspect of his physical existence. His life, by every external measure, was one of the least powerful lives a person could have in that world. His master, on one occasion, began to twist Epictetus's leg. A demonstration of ownership. A reminder of powerlessness. Epictetus said calmly, "You are going to break it." The master continued, "The bone broke." Epictetus said, "I told you so." No panic. No rage. No begging. No collapse. Just calm, clear, factual acknowledgement of what had happened and what he had predicted. Epictetus was eventually freed. He went on to found a school of philosophy in Greece. His teachings, recorded by one of his students in a book called the Enchiridion, became required reading for Roman emperors. Marcus Aurelius credited Epictetan thought with shaping his own philosophy of leadership. Epictetus's ideas shaped the intellectual development of men who commanded armies and determined the fate of nations. A slave beaten, broken physically, with nothing. And yet, by any meaningful measure, the freest mind in the room. The 10th truth, and this one is the foundation of everything that came before it, is this: what happens to you is not in your control. How you respond to what happens to you is entirely yours. This is everything. This is the core teaching of Stoic philosophy. The dichotomy of control. The fundamental division between what is yours and what is not. And once you truly understand it, not intellectually, but in your gut, in your daily choices, in how you actually respond when life hits, it changes everything. Everything outside you, the behavior of other people, the economy, the weather, whether you are treated fairly, what you are given, what you are denied, how other people see you, what circumstances you were born into, none of this is within your control. You can influence some of it. You can respond to all of it. But you cannot control it, and trying to control it is one of the primary sources of human suffering and reactive, irrational behavior. Your judgment. Your response. Your character. Your effort. What you choose to focus on. How you choose to interpret what happens to you. The values you choose to live by and the standards you choose to hold yourself to, this is entirely yours. Always. In every circumstance. In any condition. No one can take these from you without your permission. When you live inside this understanding, when you genuinely stop spending emotional and mental energy on what you cannot control and redirect it fully toward what you can, something profound happens. The noise level drops. The anxiety decreases. The rumination slows. The decisions sharpen. Your peace becomes harder to disturb, not because life has gotten easier, but because you have stopped treating its difficulty as a problem with you. Epictetus had less than almost any person you will ever know. And by the measure that actually matters, the measure of a mind free and functioning, of a character solid and clear, of a human being fully in possession of himself, he had more. That possession is available to you. Right now. In whatever circumstances you currently occupy. Point 11. The general who prepared for the worst and built something that lasted. In the winter of 1777, at Valley Forge, George Washington's Continental Army was in a condition that most historians call hopeless. The men were starving. Not uncomfortably hungry, starving. Their uniforms were inadequate for the cold. Some soldiers had no shoes and were leaving bloody footprints in the snow. Disease was moving through the camp. Desertion was constant. The British Army was comfortable, well supplied, and waiting. By every practical calculation, the American Revolution should have been finished that winter. The math simply did not work. Washington did not panic. He did not project despair to his men. He did not make desperate, reactive decisions driven by the enormity of the situation or the pressure of what failure would mean. He also did not pretend the situation was anything other than what it was. He worked. He organized what could be organized. He brought in Baron von Steuben, a Prussian military officer, to drill and train the troops in formations they had never properly learned. He made decisions, one at a time, with the resources available to him. He kept his attention on what he could actually influence: the structure of the camp, the training of the men, the maintenance of enough morale to keep people from giving up entirely. He prepared, methodically and without drama, for when the conditions would change. When spring came, that army had been transformed. Not into what they lacked. Into something that could fight effectively with what they had. And that army, built from near nothing in the worst conditions imaginable, went on to win a war that reshaped the world. The 11th truth is this: becoming calm and rational is not the destination. It is the beginning of what becomes possible. This is where most people misunderstand what this kind of work is actually for. They think the goal is to become a still, composed, undisturbed person. To achieve some state of inner peace where nothing bothers them. But calm without direction is inertia. Rational thinking without action is analysis paralysis. The composure of someone who has simply stopped caring is not inner steel, it is surrender wearing a peaceful face. The purpose of cultivating calm and rationality is not to become unmoved. It is to become capable of sustained, powerful, clear-eyed action, especially when the conditions are hard. Most especially then. Washington was not calm because the situation at Valley Forge did not matter to him. He was calm because it mattered too much to leave to panic. You are here, in this video, because something in you is reaching for more than where you currently are. More clarity. More steadiness. More genuine power over who you are becoming and how you are moving through your own life. That instinct, that reaching, is your inner steel beginning to emerge from everything that has been covering it. Here is how to begin bringing it out. Choose one practice this week. 1. When you feel the familiar pull of reactivity, the chest tightening, the jaw setting, the urge to respond immediately to something that has provoked you, pause. Take one breath. Ask yourself, what is actually happening right now? What do I actually want here? What would the calmest, most capable version of me do next? That is the entry point. One breath. One question. One moment of choosing differently than you have before. Do it once today. Do it again tomorrow. Do it on the day after that, when you are tired and the situation is harder, and the old pattern pulls at you harder too. Do it long enough, and it stops being a practice you are doing. It becomes something you are. The work becomes the person. The daily choice becomes the character. That is what this entire journey is actually building toward. Closing. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He did not write that from comfort. He did not write it on a good day when everything was going his way and calm came easily. He wrote it in the middle of military campaigns, in the middle of plagues that killed thousands of his people, in the middle of personal losses that would have broken a lesser man. He wrote it as a daily reminder to himself, because he knew, better than anyone, how easy it is to forget. How seductive the reactive pattern is. How quickly the citadel can be abandoned when the pressure is real and immediate, and the emotion is strong. Every person we have talked about today, Lincoln, Thich Nhat Hanh, Paulus, Stroud, Napoleon, Croesus, Joe Louis, Seneca, Marie Curie, Epictetus, Washington, they were not born calm. They were not naturally, effortlessly rational. They were human beings with fear, with anger, with doubt, with the same pull toward reaction that you feel. What separated them from the people around them who broke, or failed, or gave up was not a gift they were born with. It was a choice they made, consistently, over time. The choice to pause. To breathe. To think. To build. To choose the harder, better response when the easier, worse one was right there and fully available. That choice is available to you, in exactly the same measure it was available to them. The world will continue to be noisy. People will provoke you, fairly and unfairly. Life will hit you in ways you did not see coming and cannot fully prepare for. Things will go sideways. Circumstances will be unjust. The conditions will not always cooperate, and the timing will rarely be perfect. None of that is going away. And you do not need it to. Because what you are building, slowly, deliberately, one practice at a time, is something inside you that does not depend on the outside being manageable. A place of stillness and clarity that you can return to even when everything around it is in motion. A way of meeting difficulty that does not require the difficulty to be easy. That is inner steel. That is what every video on this channel is built to help you develop. If this video gave you something real, if one story or one truth landed and changed something in how you see what is possible for you, subscribe to Inner Steel. We drop new content regularly, and everything we make is built for the person who is serious about becoming someone they are genuinely proud to be. Share this with one person who needs to hear it. We will see you in the next one. Stay steady. Bonus reflection: the daily practice that ties everything together. There is one final thing worth saying, because it connects every point in this video into something you can actually use tomorrow morning. The ancient Stoics had a practice they called the evening review. Not complicated. Not mystical. Just deliberate. Before sleep, they would sit quietly and run through the day, not to judge themselves harshly, not to celebrate what went well, but to observe honestly. 3 questions every night. Where today did I react when I could have responded? Not to feel guilty about it, just to see it clearly. To name the specific moment, the specific trigger, the specific thing you said or did that came from reaction rather than intention. Where today did I think clearly under pressure, even briefly?